Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to the second day of the Artificial Intelligence and Human Rights Forum. We're pleased to welcome you again to this virtual event, the third annual AI and Human Rights Forum that we've organized, based here in Montreal, but of course virtual with connecting people from around the planet. Today we're exceptionally excited to have a panel on artificial intelligence, homogenization policy, and the China Uyghur crisis. For those of you who don't know, there's a crisis in China where the Uyghur, a Muslim minority, is being mistreated with claims of crime against humanity and genocide against them, with more than 1 million who have been put into concentration camps and various human rights violations against them. And artificial intelligence has been used as a tool to surveil this minority and to control them. So we're very pleased to have this important discussion. This is one of the most pressing human rights cases going on right now across the world. And this session is organized by Northwest University in South Africa. So we're very thankful to have Northwest University as our partner for this, not just for this forum, but for this special session. And we actually have 3 distinguished speakers today. So I'd like to introduce them, and then they'll each have 5, 6, 7 minutes to make an opening statement on their research or how they view this issue, followed by a general discussion, and then we'll take questions from the audience. So if you are following this on YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, whichever platform you're following, please don't be shy. You can put in a question on whatever platform that'll come directly in front of me, and I'd be happy to read that or pose that to our specific guest or to all of our guests. So please don't be afraid to pose those questions. So joining us today, we have Idris Erameh, who's from Northwest University in South Africa. We're also supposed to be joined by Deborah Obor, who's at the Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution in Abuja, Nigeria. And last but not least, we have Darren Byler. And Darren is Assistant Professor of International Studies at Fraser University. And we've had Darren on in the past to talk about his most recent book on the Uyghurs. So we're very pleased to have all 3 of you with us today. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule in the afternoon, late afternoon in Africa, early morning in British Columbia. So first, I would like to pass you, Nicholas, to ask you to take the floor and provide your opening comments on the theme that's to be discussed today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I would be discussing on this issue with my colleague, Dr. Deborah, who's more likely going to join us. And our topic is building around the artificial intelligence homogenization policy and the China Uyghur crisis. And why has this issue become a problem now? Of course, in recent times, the deployment of artificial intelligence in the fight against ethnic movements in China and across the globe has received more concerns. But this has become more problematic in China, particularly with the recent actions against the Uyghurs. But of course, we need to start first. What is artificial intelligence? And is artificial intelligence a problem? No. Because in the whole discourse, following the end of the world wars and other things and some other skirmishes of war, most countries began to think about how they could develop more sophisticated weapons in trying to, particularly within this period, that the concept of war itself has moved beyond conventional wars to hybrid wars. So why China initially was not interested so much in artificial intelligence, countries like America and other countries, had gone far with the whole issue of gathering of artificial intelligence and the use of artificial intelligence in human interaction. But of course, within the late 90s, particularly within the period of 2014, 2015, 2016, and 17, China began to, invest heavily on artificial intelligence. And of course, the real idea about it is that the whole concept of developing the artificial intelligence in the first place for China was that it was going to use it for, to project its global power. It's going to use it to use it to articulate geopolitical interests. But what we have seen in recent time is not what it is. And why is that the case? Even though in 2017, China made a foreign policy the analysis and made a statement about how it tends to build upon geopolitics in terms of artificial intelligence. The use of artificial intelligence in China itself has become a worrisome issue, particularly now. Let's look at it within the Uyghurs. When we look at the crisis of the Uyghur, which falls within the whole broad game of China's homogenization policy and the Belt and Road Initiative, we can best have a better grasp of why it is that the artificial intelligence is heavily deployed against the Uyghurs and why and what can be done about it. Now, looking at the crisis that has spawned, of course, the whole issue about Uyghurs and China is not a recent phenomenon because the Uyghurs and China, they have always had a series of problems, not just the Uyghurs and other minority ethnic groups who had always wanted, nationalism, who has actually preached towards nationalism or had wanted separatisms. Let me use the word separatisms. So, and because of that, these issues has always become a problem. And coming from the whole political ideology of China with the whole idea of the Confucianism principle, there's first, China believes on one united China. And because of that, the thinking always resonates that it is not in the interest of China for one or two groups to threaten to break away or to practice alien culture. Now, in the heat of all these riots and so many riots in China, the most recent one, which started in 2016, saw an unprecedented level of violence against the civilian population, particularly within the Uyghur region, in the Xinjiang region. And of course, this issue led to the whole issue of the concentration camp in China, which till today China has denied of no wrongdoing. But of course, what is most fundamental in all this is that we have seen that in this case there's been a heavy deployment of artificial intelligence against the people. Now, how is this being done? First, we have the whole issue of the use of cameras, the use of surveillance cameras, the use of glasses, the use of voice detectors, and the use of online monitoring, able the monitoring of phones and all kinds of artificial intelligence techniques, in committing mass atrocities against the Uyghurs. But of course, this is a problem, not just a problem from China, it's a problem for the whole global something. Because amidst this thing, why we talk about the positive advantages of artificial intelligence, there are grave dangers on the way China has been able to have been deploying these techniques against the Uyghurs. First, what we have seen today is that it's bringing about more political instability and human insecurity in China. One. Then two, we see that it's gradually invading into the cultural aspect and the religious aspect of the Uyghurs, which itself contradicts their fundamental human rights to religion and culture. And of course, it's also bringing about language disintegration, which has been a problem in China. Then more fundamentally, if you look at most of these issues very well, and if you see the way the artificial intelligence have been deployed over time, till the recent time, we are safe to say that the issues that have taken place in China meet the threshold of genocide. Because when we look at it very well within the core concept of genocide, either we want to borrow from the argument of Gregory Starting, the Genocide Convention, and all other human rights frameworks that leads to genocide. What is important is that there's a premeditated attack against the Uyghurs with an intent to ensure that they are eventually erased. And this has manifested in the way China has gone about these issues. And of course, it is also surprising that the global community itself have not really been able to address the issue or intervene effectively in this issue, which once again brings up the issue about the potency and the problems about the responsibility to protect. So given these conditions and given the way China has successfully deployed some artificial intelligence techniques against its citizens instead of the other way around in engaging warfare with other nations, it is safe to say that we are yet to see the end of artificial intelligence. And what that means is that it also has great consequences on the homogenization policy of China, because it is also the case that even though a majority of the Uyghurs seems to be silent, but China is yet to guarantee peace in the region. And what it therefore means is that addressing these issues, first, there needs to be an holistic way of accepting that these actions against the Uyghurs, they constitute mass atrocities or genocide. one. But of course, we can also now begin to think about the deployment of the R2P, because China itself is a world power. So the essence of deploying the R2P itself might not really scale. But what we must be thinking about is the responsibility to intervene, right? So there's a need to, world powers must come together to talk to China to bring a head and an end to these hostilities on the short run. Then in the long run, China still needs to talk to the Uyghurs. There need to be a parley within the Uyghurs to see the extent to which the Uyghurs could be co-opted freely into its long-term Belt and Road Initiative, and its to also ensure that its homogenization policy is in order. So based on that, we can really say what is going on to today are crimes against humanity, and we think that the international community must not fold its hands and allow such crimes to continue to take place. As some other cases might happen or might also take place, and the international community might never be able to intervene in that issue. And more lastly, I also personally think that these issues, the Uyghur issues and the deployment of artificial intelligence, also have great implications for China's expanding global posturing across the world. Particularly, it brings to question the whole issue of China's posturing about human rights and the context of China ensuring that civilians are being protected within the region and across the globe. So these issues are issues that we have raised. That I want to say I once again happy being among this group, and that is what I feel about the China and Uyghurs policy. And we think that we would welcome more comments and everything in the better loss of this discourse. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas, for that very detailed discussion and for weaving it into the Responsibility to Protect, talking about the Genocide Convention. I know there's going to be a lot of, I think, comments that will come up on that because we have a lot of people following us that are working on tech issues, but not know the wider international norms that can be applied to the case of the Uyghurs. So Deborah is not with us yet. So as we wait for her to join, and hopefully she will be able to join us today, I would now perhaps like to jump forward to the next speaker, to Darren. And Darren, the floor is yours to make an opening statement or comment.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Kyle, and thank you all for being here. I'll just speak a little bit about my experience in Xinjiang, the Uyghur region, and how I came to be interested in tech and how it's being used there. So all the way back in 2011, I was interested in how Uyghurs, who I was observing while I was living there, learning their language and learning Chinese, learning Uyghur and Chinese, how they were using smartphones, and how it was helping them, or they thought was helping them, to sort of build culture and knowledge production in Uyghur language. And then in 2014, when I went for a second year of fieldwork, I was interested in how the police had installed QR codes on people's doors, including my own door in Urumqi, and would visit with smartphones in hand, scanning that QR code, and how they pull up a digital file for the people that were registered to the apartment. And then in 2016, I started to hear about how they were scanning people's phones. And so what I was seeing was phones becoming a kind of tracking device, both in terms of movement, but also behavior. It wasn't really, though, until 2017 that we started to see these tools emerge that really focus on data analytics. That they're called counterterrorism swords, which scan through someone's digital history, plugging in using a USB cable into someone's phone. And here, they're using AI in this application to sort through digital history, looking for probable or possible matches to 50,000 or more markers of political or religious activity. And the way I can sort of corroborate the details of what I was observing, all the way up into 2018, which was my last visit to the region, is that I've been working with The Intercept, which is a journal that has obtained hundreds of thousands of internal police documents through a state contractor that was employed to build the mobile policing system in the Uyghur region, in Urumqi, the capital. And what that data shows us is that people were having their phones scanned 10 times or more. and that there was a disproportionate focus on Uyghurs and Muslims in general. Around 80% of or more of the scans were focused on Uyghurs in this city, even though they were only around 16% of the population. The other thing that we know from the internal police documents is that over 1.5 million people were found to have illegal apps or apps that had been illegalized on their phones. 100,000 or so had been actually interrogated as a result of data scans of their phones. So that these tools are built by Mia Pico. They're built by iFlyTech, which is a former MIT partner, they also then began to use face recognition systems around the same time. Face recognition was installed at checkpoints where they you scan your ID and then it's matched to your image. Part of the way that they built this system is they asked everyone to submit their data. Not asked, they forced everyone to submit their data, which is facial imagery, but along with that DNA, blood samples, fingerprints, all of those sort of biometric markers. But in a very systematic way, in a way that was very symmetrical. So they had a really powerful data set to work from. And so, the systems there, when it comes to face recognition, are some of the most sophisticated in the world. What I'm seeing in the internal police documents is that they have, 96% probability that the person they're capturing either in video or at one of these checkpoints is the person that they think it is. So it's very, very accurate. And a bunch of this is built, at least initially, on data sets that were available open access. From places like Microsoft, from the University of Washington and other places. And so, as I'm thinking about what this means for AI and what it means for tech development in general, it's pushing me to think about sort of the ethics and the sort of cultural logics that are embedded in rapid prototyping, rapid development of AI-enabled tools, particularly around biometric surveillance, where the open source sort of making things widely available, and also the market strategy of sort of hooking people in by allowing them to use a free service has some really detrimental consequences for vulnerable people. So, the data set I'm working on with the Intercept was built using an Oracle database, which is, a US-based company, the open source version of Oracle software. One of the things that I'm heartened to see is that a number of the institutions in the West that provided these sort of open source face recognition databases, of images of faces, they've started to take some of those down. And Microsoft Research Asia, which is based in China, has begun to talk about how they're no longer going to recruit interns or students from Chinese security affiliated institutions, which is a positive step. But I think there needs to be much more. We need to have a really robust design and ethics pedagogy in our instruction of young engineers. And we need to really safeguard vulnerable people. That's thinking from the institutional perspective. Then, of course, we need global regulations around these tools that would institute some consequences for the harms that are caused to people. The Uyghurs are probably a limit case of sort of the worst case scenario of how these tools can be used. Hundreds of thousands of people were diagnosed as terrorists or extremists because of digital behavior that was quite innocuous, like having a VPN or using WhatsApp. And so it's been a tool that's been used to separate large numbers of people from each other. Their families are being torn apart, and that's what's leading to this sort of open air prison system and a kind of control society where people have real no outside space. The phones, the cameras, everything is pointed at them and is really contracting the space of freedom that they have. And so, this might be the first case of kind of genocidal violence that doesn't actually result in mass killing because it's actually constraining life in such a dramatic way using AI-assisted or augmented tools. So I'll just stop there. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Darren, for that that deep overview of tech and your experience researching and working there going back over a decade and how it's transformed in front of everyone's eyes. So we were supposed to have Deborah join us, but Deborah has not been able to. So apologies for that. Our gender balance on this panel has failed. So we apologize. Hopefully she will be able to join us. But I would like to maybe to turn on what Darren said about how this is a kind of an AI enabled genocidal violence, but yet we don't see mass killings. And I would like to ask Nicholas this, because you talked about the Genocide Convention, you talked about the response to protect and mass atrocities, and there are those that argue that this doesn't fit any of that case because there aren't mass killings. But I'm wondering, Nicholas, if you could maybe tell us a bit more about why these are in fact mass atrocity crimes as defined by the Genocide Convention.
Yeah, you see, why we must accept that these are mass atrocity crimes. First, if we look at how these crimes are being committed, first we will look at the Genocide Convention, and anything going by the Genocide Convention, for an action to be termed genocide, there must be action and intention. Now, if we look at what has really happened in China, we see that first there's an action towards committing all kinds of mass atrocities against the Uyghurs. In fact, if we look at the types of genocide that is taking place against the Uyghurs, it is safe to say that there's cultural genocide, there's physical genocide, and there's biological genocide. Because the whole essence of the reorientation, putting them in closed prisons, as Darren has just said, it's sterilizing, using a sterilized system, forced marriage, rape, and other things, we can call them under biological genocide. Then, when we look also that the whole the nature of the atrocity itself, which manifests in terms of eradicating their culture, making them to renounce Islam for Confucianism at the expense of their own issues, also instead constitute themselves as cultural genocide. Then, if we look at them in terms of the physical genocide, the whole essence of ensuring that the Uyghurs do not come close to where they used to call their ancestral homes, right? The whole essence of ensuring that they are no longer caged where they are, the whole essence of thinking that they must be assimilated within the core China policy itself, falls within the issue of physical genocide. So, going by those genocides, and in fact, if we look at the 10 stages of genocide by stating from organization to denial, we see that in fact at the last stage of it, which is what has been synonymous to the way China has been doing it, is denial. Because even as we speak, China has continued to absorb itself of no wrongdoing. In fact, it is the issue, what people will say in Africa, that they are boarding students. So some people will say they are just attending boarding schools, but that is not really what it is. It is the fact that these guys are held in solidarity compartment with to ensure that their human rights are stripped off from them. So going by the Genocide Convention and looking at the manifestation of mass atrocities, first we look at the issue of action and intention. They will also look at the presence of biological genocide, cultural genocide, physical genocide. They will also push the issue beyond this angle to situating them within the 10 stages of genocide of starting. Then we say that it's safe to say that going by the Genocide Convention, this mass atrocity fits to be called genocide and must be treated as one.
Thank you, Nicholas, for that. Darren, I'd like to turn to you. You, I think many people in North America or around the world don't quite know what companies are kind of implicated in the AI mass surveillance of the Uyghurs. You mentioned iFly check, but I'm wondering if you could maybe tell us more. Like, are there other companies that are doing this? I know there's been reports by Human Rights Watch, by reporting. Could you give us a wider view of which tech companies are involved in this surveillance?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot. So there's 1,400 tech firms that are working in this region, but there's some primary players, and the company that has built most of the checkpoints, and that services the Integrated Joint Operations Platform, which brings all of these different kinds of data streams together. Is a company called CETC, which is the China Electronics Technology Corporation or company, which is a big conglomerate. It's really a military contractor, and is the parent company of one of the world's largest camera companies, which is called Hikvision, which is a surveillance camera company, hardware company, that has cameras everywhere in the world, including in Canada, and in other places. They're quite sophisticated equipment. So Hikvision and their primary competitor, Dahua, are responsible for a lot of the smart camp systems, which is the surveillance equipment that's used inside the camps, and also safe city systems, which are camera systems and command centers that use face recognition enabled software, license plate recognition, and other ways of tracking people through space. And so what we see in the feasibility studies for these safe city systems is that everyone that's registered to live in a given county or city, whatever the jurisdictional situation is, has to be accounted for. And so if someone is coming into that space who's not registered, like, there will be alerts to the police in real time. And also the system is meant to be at least at the level of making people searchable. So you can type in their name or their ID number, and you can pull them up in real time, finding out where they are. And then you can also play back in history to see where they were before. And of course, there's automated systems that are looking for patterns in movement, patterns of behavior, where someone is not going to work as they were supposed to, or was traveling outside of the bounds of where they're allotted to be. And so that's how it becomes this really sophisticated system of control. So Hikvision, Dahua are building the hardware, but there's a whole bunch of software companies, the AI startups, that really work with those hardware companies, and those range from SenseTime to Mugv, which has a Face++ algorithm associated with it, and E2 and others. Most of these companies are Chinese companies. They do often have some U.S. connection, former employees of other of U.S. and North America-based companies. Many of the CEOs of these companies were trained in the West, and so there's those kinds of training linkages, and then there's investment in these companies that is coming from Silicon Valley venture capital. And so there's all of these linkages. We should think about this as part of a global system, that this isn't like isolated to China. And when I talk to people that work in tech in China, like at companies that are involved in the systems in Xinjiang, is they would talk about how what they're doing is very similar to what U.S. companies do in support of U.S. state security, and they don't really see themselves as doing anything different. And they think they're being held to a different standard. That there's a lot of hypocrisy in the way that China tech is pointed out as this bad other, when they think that U.S. tech is really doing something similar. They just say we're doing different we're following different laws, and we're being patriotic in our own state. So that's why I think we really need to rethink at a fundamental level the role of tech in state security and in the global war on terror and all of that.
Thank you, Darren, and thank you for bringing up Hikvision. I'd like the audience to know that for the UN 75th anniversary, they partnered with Hikvision, and there was a lot of backlash, and the UN eventually had to drop them as a partner for concerns about the surveillance of the Uyghurs. And one comment coming in to Nicolas' comments on the Genocide Convention also states that Article 2E of the Genocide Convention states that separating children from one group and moving them to another is also an aspect of genocide, and we have seen that take place in China vis-a-vis the Uyghur population. So it's a sobering, if not depressing, fact. So I would encourage everyone watching to pose questions. We're starting to get some questions that are coming in. Deborah has not been able to join us, unfortunately, so really apologize for that. But I would like to maybe maybe a segue to Darren's last comments, remarks. I'm going to put this up on the screen. And it says, it's coming in from Twitter, says, considering that some of these tools are developed and manufactured in China, these AI tools, how do we impose ethics and laws upon them? So this talks about the wider issue about global governance of these technologies, trying to ensure that private entities respect international human rights law and business and human rights laws. Who would like to make a comment on this? That how do we impose ethics and laws on some of these entities or private sector actors? Nicholas or Darren, do any of you have any thoughts on this, or should we go to the next one?
I'm happy.
Yeah, I think. Okay, let's have Larry. You can go ahead.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll start and then you follow up. So there's there's some immediate things that we can do, which is we can stop working with these companies, stop importing their equipment and buying their tools. In some places they have begun to do that. In the U.S., they've placed a number of these companies on an entities list, which means that U.S. suppliers can no longer work with them. But it's not that well enforced, and many nations haven't done that, haven't taken that step yet. So there's component parts of a lot of this tech, especially when it comes to microprocessing chips from Intel and Nvidia and other companies, that there could be some stoppage there. Longer term, though, like we need global regulation around tech in general. Because tech is moving so quickly, AI is developing so fast. It's really out in front of any sort of regulation in most of the world. And so right now there's sort of a piecemeal approach of targeting particular companies. But that's the design is happening, and these things are being distributed in the world at scale. And so we need a much more robust response from the global community to push back at these things in general. And that's, I think, when we could start to introduce some costs to building harmful forms of tech. But it's really hard to see exactly how we get to that point because it's such a massive problem.
So, Nicholas, I think you had some comments that you'd like to make, and I also would pose a question to you on top of that comments. What is the view? What is the view in Africa? There's a lot of discussion in North America, for example, on Chinese companies, Uyghurs. Is this being discussed, debated by civil society in Africa? Is it on the radar or not? Just curious to know what's happening in South Africa and as well as the larger subcontinent of Africa.
Yeah, I think for now, the issue of AI is not so much an issue in Africa because we all know Africa is a developing continent. So it's the continent itself is still battling with some developmental challenges. So we're still battling with sophisticated technology. So it therefore means that before Africa gets to that stage, because yes, we begin to see a nexus between state repression, which is very common in Africa, and violent armed conflict against civilians that could be deployed or that could be sustained with the use of artificial intelligence. And I can't bet you that if some of those things find their way in Africa, it's going to be a different ballgame, right? The whole world is going to think that there's going to be a problem. So what we are not saying is that now that it is in China, we need to move beyond condemnation to ensure that these issues are shot to the global level. And they are not just global condemnation, but just like Lawrence said, there need to be stiffer laws to ensure that we don't allow the spread of this artificial intelligence, particularly regarding state and citizen relations, as it's going to be a very, very big problem in Africa. And let's not also forget that given the nature of most post-colonial African states, where political instability and human insecurity has continued to take its toll, it's not very much unlikely that if such sophisticated weapons, sophisticated technology finds itself in Africa, there are going to be regional and global implications because Already we are fighting issues of migration, we are fighting issues of human rights violations, we are fighting issues of big man powerism, and we are fighting all kinds of social pathologies, right? That have made Africa itself lack development. And if these issues come, we can bet say that the world itself is no longer safe. So what we are saying is that we are not condemning artificial intelligence. We are saying that we need to ensure that, one, there's a global regulation. And in fact, as I'm concerned, the whole issue of artificial intelligence must receive greater attention, just like the ban on chemical weapons and biological weapons via the Non-Proliferation Treaty. We need to have global treaties like that will put an end to this thing, because going by the way of trying to boycott trade with the companies and everything, the companies are out there to do business. They're out there to do business. And just like you once said again, it will amount to mere hypocrisy saying that they are not going to, research more on this. Even China itself is paying so much to research on artificial intelligence because China has seen it as a more dependable medium, to fight the Uyghurs. And what therefore means is that the world in the next 5-10 years, we are going to see a massive improvement in the deployment of artificial intelligence, only and only if the UN and the global community stands up to regulate its usage.
Thank you, Nicholas, and for reminding us that although this is being deployed in China, that the concerns of exporting this kind of digital authoritarianism, and it's not just happening from China to Africa, but it's also, we have companies in Canada that are exporting in democracies, exporting technology being used for oppressive measures. So I think it's across the board. It's something for all governments, society groups to work on. I'm now going to put another question. This one is coming up. Question: is AI being used against Uyghurs beyond China's borders? We know that Uyghurs are being harassed abroad as well. Not sure if any of you can talk about this, following Uyghurs who are being forced back to China or being surveilled in countries where they are refugees, like in Turkey. Darren, do you know anything about this, or do you have anything to comment? And Nicola as well, if you want to make comments, the floor is yours.
Sure, I can go ahead.
Okay. Okay. I think if we look at it very well, it's not very unlikely that AI could be used, to trace Uyghurs, not based in China. Take, for instance, there's a current study I'm working on about the Cameroon Anglophone crisis, particularly within the Anglophone region of Cameroon, and how there have been cases of mass atrocities and other things like that, which has resulted to mass migration of the Anglophone community out of Cameroon. But what you have also noticed here is that even the Cameroonians, the Anglophones in diaspora, they are also very scared of interacting with people because their Facebook pages, their social networks are equally monitored. And what it therefore means is that if that is the case here, it's not very unlikely that China is not capable of also monitoring the activities of Uyghurs that are out of China, particularly given the sophisticated nature of artificial intelligence.
Darren,
I can just add that something, some more concrete examples of things that I've seen in the police documents. In one of the documents, they talked about how a Uyghur who had fled to Malaysia and then from there on to Turkey, how that person was missing, but they had tracked him down on Facebook using image recognition. And they were also associating, so they're looking at his pictures on his Facebook profile, and they were associating those that were in his images with him. And so I think that we can assume that a lot of Uyghurs in diaspora are subject to dissimilar forms of surveillance. I don't know how systematic it is, like if there's like an automated system that's constantly trolling or not trolling, but scraping the data that Uyghurs produce abroad and assessing it, or if it's more on a case-by-case sort of investigation level. But they certainly have the same sorts of capacity tools that intelligence units have everywhere in the world, or most places in the world. Things that like Palantir, which is like an explicit model that the Chinese companies have thought about as something that they want to mimic in their own context, which is a data scraping tool that will then assess and kind of create a holistic portrait of an individual. So that's happening, and there was a report that came out just last week that points out that over 1,500 Uyghurs have been targeted that are living abroad, and I see it in the watch lists that the ID numbers of many people that are living abroad. Yeah, we know that there's a lot of watching that's happening. And it has a chilling effect in terms of what Uyghurs are able to say. Many Uyghurs, most Uyghurs that are living in diaspora are afraid to speak up at all about what's happening to them because some of their relatives are not yet in detention, and they know that they could be taken away if they speak out. And those that do speak out are those that have already lost their relatives, for the most part. And then as they speak out, they become a target of state harassment. So they're really making a difficult, really life choice as they decide to become a Uyghur activist or an advocate for their people. And so, when we see these people sort of, speaking in a language that is not their own about what's happening to them, the mass atrocities, we have to really admire their courage. It is really a lesson in what it means to be a human and what it means to care about other people, what it means to have a kind of grace, sort of sharing in the pain of their relatives, their family members who have been taken away, and refusing to forget.
Thank you, Darren. And I would like to remind the crowd that what Darren said is that a lot of the Uyghurs that are speaking up on behalf of their people, that they do face threats, and tied to the last question, Facebook recently revealed that there were inauthentic accounts on their platform that were conducting kind of cyber espionage on Uyghur human rights activists, including in Western countries and Canada. So we do know that this is happening. So a question coming in from Ted, and it's for you, Darren. I think you thought your last name was Tyler, but it's Byler, but it's for you, Darren. And Ted asks, would cutting off American imports limit this repressive system, or just hasten the interests of China in developing more autonomous tech?
Well, you probably do both, unfortunately. What we have seen is that once companies are placed on an entities list, which is cutting off some of that supply, that there's often a dramatic drop in their share price if they're a public company. So a number of these companies have lost hundreds of billions of dollars, really, as a result in terms of their valuation. So it's sort of how fictional money in some ways, but it is really does have a dramatic effect, and it also shapes their sort of investment and development trajectory. So if a company was planning to go public and was hoping to not only do surveillance systems but also self-driving cars and stuff like that, part of the market is now cut off for them, and so we're introducing a cost. It might not be fully effective in stopping the companies, but it does produce a cost. But it has also, like the question, the person asking the question suggests, hastened development of microprocessing chips in China, and other things that they're trying to source in the country domestically. So it's too soon to tell if they'll be successful in doing that. But I think we have to use whatever tools are available to us to slow this down.
Thank you. I have another question. Once again, this one's for you, Darren. Although, Nicholas, if you have any thoughts on this, please do take the floor. And this is coming from our colleague Frank Chalk, and he says, Darren, would you like to help draft an international convention regulating tech, including protection for the rights of cultural minorities? Is there already anyone writing a draft? And I would just point out that yesterday the UN Special Rapporteur on minority rights did issue a report on minorities in conflict and talked about social media being a factor in hate speech and so forth. But I'm just wondering, Darren, if you could maybe talk about this, or just know if anyone is doing work on this on minorities and regulating the tech industry.
Well, so I'm an anthropologist. I'm not a policy maker or policy really analyst. But I'd be happy to read drafts and take a secondary role in that sort of knowledge production. There are people that are quite concerned with this. Many. A lot of the focus in AI ethics is really sort of Euro-American centric, and so there's a lot, which is okay. I mean, it's not okay, but I understand that we have to be very concerned about our own colonialism, our own racial legacies that we're fighting against through sort of anti-racist design and policy. But we have to think beyond the U.S. and European context to think about how these tools circulate in the world and are being generated in other places. But the work of Meredith Whittaker, who's now at the FTC in the U.S., but before ran AI Now, has been really inspirational to me, and I consider her a friend and colleague, and I think she's doing really wonderful work in this sort of area when it comes to thinking about protection of racial minorities in particular.
Nicholas, did you have anything to comment on the last question?
Yeah, I think the question is a very good question, and I must thank Ren for his response and other things like that. Then, of course, let me also start this way. What arose my interest about the Uyghurs is the problem in Myanmar, the Rohingyas in Myanmar. And what it therefore means is that it's almost the case that there's a regular pattern of violence against cultural violence against minority groups, which has persisted across the globe with no end in sight. And what it therefore means is that it's not going to be a bad idea thinking towards the direction or working with a policy think tank on how there could be a draft policy in addressing these issues, because minority issues are cultural violence against minority groups are always a problem everywhere. It's not synonymous to Africa. It's across the globe. It's in China, it's in Canada, it's in the US, it's in Germany. There are always cases of a little minority group which this current government perpetuating violence against those groups. So it means that it's an issue that is fast, attracting global attention, and we need to also think about how we could, address this issue via a policy. And that's why when in my other submission, I was talking about that the issue has attracted issues like we need a policy like in the form of the Non-Proliferation Treaty that will really address these issues and nip them in the bud.
Thank you, Nicholas, and for reminding us that minorities in every society face challenges and threats to their human rights, and it's not just one region of the world or one country. It's pretty much across the board and everywhere. So we have to be aware of that, particularly how these technologies are deployed in our society, even for a democracy that has a better human rights record than others. There's a question coming in here. I'm going to put it on the screen. Are Chinese companies and authorities testing AI tools on the Uyghur for eventual larger use to monitor other people in China? We've heard about the social credit system. We're seeing, to fight with COVID, that we're seeing AI surveillance cameras be installed all over the place. Does anyone have anything to add to this, or could delve into this in a bit more detail?
I could start. So yes, they are being used in other places in China, not at the same scale. So the Xinjiang case is sort of unique in the sense of how many sort of human technicians are involved and how many companies are involved. They hired 90,000 new state security workers. Most of them are tasked with monitoring checkpoints, doing these scans, all the sort of work that's necessary to sort of maintain the system. And other places in China, they haven't hired security workers at that scale. And so the tools haven't been distributed in the same way. The scanning tools for people's phones, you'll find them in almost every airport, every international border context in China now. And I don't know exactly how they're being used, but yes, they proliferated across the country, and they also talk about exporting them outside of the country to other places. These companies are quite large, and they're working on multiple things at once. We also have to understand that the way that surveillance works in China is that it's an interlinked system. So lots of Uyghurs that were living in other parts of the country were detected or monitored by systems in other parts of the country, and then eventually sent back to Xinjiang. And so, Xinjiang doesn't stay in Xinjiang. It's actually kind of, across the entire country already. It's just that the scalar differences is the main thing, the level of it. I would look to other spaces where there's contentious politics, like Tibet or Inner Mongolia or Hong Kong, as sites where you could see more development in these directions, as we've seen in Xinjiang. But in general, if you're a political or religious or sexual minority in China, you have to be concerned about these kinds of tools being used to target you.
Thank you, Darren. So Darren and Nicholas, I really want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule to join us today. We had a fascinating discussion on AI and the Uyghurs, and discussing the implications for human rights, not just in China, but across the world. We're going to post this video online, so please, if you see it, please share it. But thank you so much on behalf of my colleagues for joining us. And for those watching, our next session of the forum will take place at 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time later today. Thank you.